Madam President, the American people are angry. They are angry because they are living through the worst recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment is not 8.2%. Real unemployment is closer to 15%. Young people who are graduating high school and they're graduating college, they're going out into the world. They want to become independent. They want to create jobs. There are no jobs. There are workers out there, and I'm sure you know them, Madam President, 50, 55 years old, who intended to work out the remainder of their work lives. Suddenly they got a pink slip. Their self-esteem is destroyed. They're never going to have another job again, and now they're worried about their retirement security. And what the American people are angry about is they understand that they did not cause this recession. This recession was caused by the greed, the recklessness, and the illegal behavior of the people on Wall Street. And what these people on Wall Street did is spend billions of dollars, trying to deregulate Wall Street, and they got their way. $5 billion in 10 years is what they spent. And then they were able to merge investment banks with commercial banks, with insurance companies. They got everything they wanted. They said, get the government off the backs of Wall Street. They got it. And the end result was that they plunged this country into the worst recession since the Great Depression.
Then we hit the Great Depression. And coming out of the Great Depression, we put 3 new regulations in place. Glass-Steagall, which divides our community banks basically from the Wall Street investment banks. FDIC insurance, put money in a bank and know that it's safe. And some SEC regulations so you can invest on Wall Street and they can't cheat you too directly. That's what we put in place. For 50 years, we have no bank failures, no major crises. It works. Now, there's innovation, there's change. It's time to change regulations. It gets to be the early 1980s. And what do? Instead of saying new products, we need to change regulations to adapt. We take a different path. We say,
you allow banks to go in the insurance business and vice versa?
Let's deregulate. That's exactly right. We begin to break down the old regulations. We say, who needs regulations? They're so pokey, so old. So we go with this idea of let's get rid of regulation. Now what happens? Late 1980s, savings and loan crisis, should have been a warning. Late 1990s, remember long-term capital management, the hedge fund, should have been a warning, but we let it go. Early 2000s, Enron, bad books, not telling the truth, should have been a warning, but we let it go. And where do we end up? In the biggest crisis since the Great Depression.
I have said many times that the 2 worst votes that I cast as a member of Congress, going into Iraq, which the intelligence was manipulated to send us into Iraq, and I should never have voted to give President Bush that authority to go send our troops into Iraq. And the second worst vote I ever made was the repeal of Glass-Steagall. All that did was to allow the banks to expand their interests, so to speak. After the Depression in the 30s, they passed the law, Glass-Steagall, to say to banks, you will do nothing but banking. And when we repealed Glass-Steagall, we allowed them to get into real estate, to get into insurance, to create these boutique-type investments, if I can say it that way. And we can see the problems the banks are in today. I didn't vote for the bailout of the banks. I think the big ones should have failed, but that's history now. The Congress did bail out the banks. And I think that if we're going to have a strong banking system, we must reinstate Glass-Steagall.
This year marks the 9th anniversary of the greatest financial crisis in a generation. We're all old enough, and our memories are good enough to remember that. That economic disaster nearly caused the destruction of our country's entire financial infrastructure and led to what history now calls the Great Recession. During the last 9 years, if we look back and remember, Wall Street banks have succeeded and actually have made a great deal of money. Meanwhile, many, many Americans have continued, literally millions, to experience what we would term financial failure. J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley have all reported record profits during the recession and the years following. Wall Street in the last 9 years has regained all of its pre-crisis wealth with interest, while Main Street has yet to see a real recovery in so many communities from coast to coast.
Mr. President, on November 19th, 1863, standing on the blood-stained battlefield of Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln delivered one of the most significant and best-remembered speeches in American history. At the conclusion of the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln stated, and I quote, "that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Mr. President, in the year 2015, with a political campaign finance system that is corrupt and that is increasingly controlled by billionaires and special interests, I fear very much that, in fact, government of the people, by the people, for the people, is perishing in the United States of America. Mr. President, 5 years ago, in the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, by a 5-4 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court said to the wealthiest people in this country, they said, okay, billionaires, you already own much of the economy. Now we are going to give you the opportunity to purchase the United States government, the White House, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, governor's seats, legislatures, and state judicial branches as well. In essence, that is exactly what they said, and in fact, that is exactly what is happening as we speak.
We need a level playing field, and we need to go back to the realization that Teddy Roosevelt had, that we have to have a limit on the flow of money, and that corporations are not people. That's why we have different laws that govern corporations than govern individual citizens. And so to say that corporations are people, again, flies in the face of all the traditional Supreme Court decisions that we have made, that have been made in the past.